Okay, so that was an exercise that I thought might be about an hour and a half, turned into almost 3 hours, okay? So, but when I was checking in with the classes, or the groups, you were saying you were enjoying it. Did you feel like you learned anything? I have probably read, true story, I have probably read Why Was Sin Permitted approaching 100 times. I've just read it and read it and read it and I read it again this morning. And at one point, I entertained the idea of committing it to memory, and then I changed my mind. Because there were just other things that I'd love to have committed to memory, and there's only so much space in my brain. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about those three things. Let me see if I can get my clicker going here. Okay, so we've made our transition. Is everybody clear that we've made the transition from creation? Now we're moving into the fall, right? You see that? Great. And so we're going to talk about these three things. The first is the character profile of Satan. And for this one, rather than getting the spokespersons up front, let's just sort of brainstorm, and I'll write some of these things down here. And as I said to you, I want you to be able to give me some substance. If I put you on the spot and say, are you sure about that? I want you to be able to come back to me. And I might even just test you. I might think that you've made a great point, but I might ask you about it anyway and see if you can give me a good answer. Now, this is not just for the spokespersons. Eventually, probably we'll get you up front here a little bit later in the class, but let's just start with the character profile. So we'll write that here. Okay, character profile. And did you find that there was one chapter more than another that sort of helped you on this one?
Yeah.
The first one more? Okay. The first one deals with why was sin permitted. It's really delving into the nature of the rebellion. And this morning I was reading, borrowed a friend's book, made some marks in it. Hope he doesn't mind. So I'll be interested to see if the things that jumped out at you were some of the same things that jumped out at me this morning, okay? So let's just kind of start with, throw some stuff out. Let's start with, who wants to raise their hand so we don't have a mass. Okay, what's one thing? Character profile. Who was this guy, Esther?
Lucifer, he was holy and undefiled. He was perfect.
Okay, very good. So what I'll do is I'll probably put it in sort of two categories over here. So we have holy, and what was the other one you said? And undefiled. Okay, I like that. Undefiled. That's under the Lucifer side of the character profile. Undefiled. Very good. Okay. Good. Excellent. I think there's a easy case to be made for that. All the things that God makes are good. Excellent. Karina.
He was glowing in the glory of God.
Okay. So he reflected the glory of God. So I'll put here, reflected God's glory. Excellent. Okay, very good. Okay, Jim in the back.
He was the highest angel, or the highest in power.
Okay, that's a great point. That's going to become important for us. The point that Jim is saying here is that he was the highest of the angels. And it's for that very reason that it's going to help us to make sense of something that comes up a little bit later that's a bit tricky to understand. And let me just sort of throw that out there. One of the things, I think it was Jim, I think it was actually you that said it. Hey, we're reading through these chapters, and I have as many questions as I'm getting answers. And that's exactly one of the reasons that we do this exercise. Because if I sit up here and I start giving answer after answer after answer, those answers will be appreciated only to the degree that we understand the questions that those are answering. Right? So it's better for us to go in and wrestle with the text, to wrestle with the rebellion. One of the groups upstairs was wrestling with a kind of quirky question about digestion in the new heaven and the new earth. And nothing wrong with sort of asking those big picture questions, because then the answers are all the more powerful. And so, excellent. Very good. Highest, I just say the highest angel?
The highest in authority and power.
Highest. I'm just going to put, authority, in authority, and power.
Of the angels.
Yeah, that's right. That's understood, of the angels. Okay? Excellent. One of the questions that this actually begins to answer is, how does this rebellion even get traction? Right? How does it even get off the ground that Lucifer could even imagine that there would be any sense in which he would be comparable to or compatible with on the same level as Jesus? And that opens the reality to us that there must have been some fundamental similarity between Lucifer and Jesus. He had to have perceived, hey, he didn't want to be equal with the Father, notice, to start with. His jealousy centered around Jesus. So there must have been something, and we'll talk about that. What was that thing that caused Lucifer to imagine that it was reasonable or rational to want to be equal with Jesus? Okay, and this is the beginning of the answer to that. Okay, Kevin.
We talked about the stones, that Lucifer was covered in like 10 stones and Jesus had 12. So
That's interesting. Okay, so there was a similarity of appearance.
Yes.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Okay, please, Destiny.
I was going to say, in his character, he was an egomaniac, and he just cared a lot about what others thought of him.
Okay, so he was a egomaniac. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot on that one. In what sense was he an egomaniac? Where's a text I can tie that to? I don't disagree. I actually totally agree.
I mean, I don't know which text to use because I underlined
You underlined the whole. Okay, so you find one right now. I'm going to go to somebody else, and I'll come back to you. Okay, Rochelle.
I was just going to say he was wise and he was perfect in his beauty.
Okay, he was wise and beautiful. Okay, very good. Wise and beautiful. This is obviously the pre-fall situation. Wise and B-E-A-U, beautiful. Excellent. Thank you, Rochelle. Okay, please, Jason, down front.
He was a free will, sentient, capable of choice-making being.
Okay, so he's a free moral agent. Okay, excellent. So, free moral agent. I'm actually going to put that up here right at the top because that is absolutely essential. Free moral agent. Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, in the back, JJ.
There were other angels that were below him that looked up to him, so he had a great responsibility to...
That's right. So that's a good point. It shows us that hierarchy in and of itself is not sinful. If there are angels under him, you might remember there was a particular place where she said they delighted to do his commands. Yeah. Right? Which is very interesting. And even when we come to the book of Revelation, we see that there's sort of hierarchy. There's the throne of God, and Jesus is on the throne, and then there's the four beasts that are just around the throne, and then there's the 24 elders, and then it sort of works its way out, right? Ty might have talked to you a little bit about that. And so that's a great point. There was hierarchy, which alerts us to the fact that, yes, he had a responsibility, and also that hierarchy in and of itself, having authority, is not sinful in and of itself. It's the abuse of power. We're going to talk about that as well. Great point. Okay, please, sorry.
He was perfect.
Okay, he was perfect. Let's just state the obvious here. Okay, he was perfect, meaning he was morally perfect. He was perfect in his nature. He was perfect. The way that God made him, he was perfect. We're actually going to see that very word is used in Ezekiel 28. You were perfect in all your ways until iniquity was found in you. Great point. To state the obvious, but it needs to be stated. Please, Eric.
He was a protector of God's law, or a presenter of God's law. I guess you could put it that way as well.
Covering cherub.
Okay, so the covering cherub. Okay, so he dwelt in a situation where he was, that's similar to Jason's or JJ's, isn't it? That's similar to, he had responsibility to issue commands and to have some kind of authority. Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, excellent. So he's covering cherub. I'm not going to be able to write up all of them here, but that's sort of communicated at some level in the holy. He was covering cherub. Jenny.
He was created.
Oh, thank you for that. Did everybody hear what she said? He was created. Now, how far down can I go here? Is that my two? One more? I got one more. Okay, so he was perfect. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to save myself a line here. I'm going to put, he was perfectly created. Oh, nice. See what I did there? Okay. So that gets me one more line here, and we can always transition over there, but I got some other stuff I want to write. Okay, anything else under this sort of left element, the pre-fall? Okay, so let's now move to the other side. Let's go over here. What about post-fall? Talk to me about a character profile. He begins his rebellion. What's going on here? Esther.
He was prideful. He is prideful.
Okay, prideful. Very good. I'll take that. You will notice It look like you were going to read something there, Esther, yeah?
Oh, yeah. I was looking for actually a different passage for Lucifer, like, because it called him, like, the light bearer, right?
Yeah.
And
That's
so I
right.
was looking for that. But also for prideful, it blew my mind when I was reading this, and it said that, like, God actually, this is in my own summary, but showed Lucifer what the outcome would be, and he was too prideful. He knew he was wrong. He knew God was holy in all his ways, but he was too prideful to let go of
Excellent.
his goal, and it just blew my mind that, so he knew he was going to be defeated, but he still didn't let go.
That's one of the things that most powerfully impacted me. Look at the page that you're quoting from is page 39. Let me just read that section here. Pagination might be a little different there, but it says, the time had come for a final decision. He must fully yield to the divine sovereignty or place himself in open rebellion. Now watch this. This is the point Esther's making. He nearly reached the decision to return, and then I've underlined these words heavily, but pride forbade him. Okay? So the thing that prevented, he was intellectually convinced. You're exactly right. In fact, we're going to talk about that tomorrow now, it will be. But he was intellectually convinced, which raises a question. If you're convinced you're in the wrong, why do you press on anyway?
Because he cared what the others thought about him.
Okay, that's a possible answer, Destiny, that he cared what others would think. He didn't want to be perceived as drawing back. Okay, let me just read you one more thing, then I'll take some hands here. On page 41, now listen to this, page 41. It says, so far as Satan himself was concerned, it was true that he had now gone too far, but it was not so with those who had been blinded by his deceptions. To them, the counsel and entreaties of the loyal angels opened a door of hope. And had they heeded the warning, they might have broken away from the snare of Satan, and then 2 words, but pride. Love for their leader and the desire for unrestricted freedom were permitted to bear sway. So in both cases, in both Lucifer's case and in his sympathizers, in his loyalists, the major obstacle, the insuperable, insurmountable obstacle to returning to their former position was pride. But pride forbade him, and then with the followers, the loyalists, but pride. Right? Very important. Great insight. Okay, anybody else? What else do we got here? Something else. Lorin.
We decided that the perfect all-encompassing description of him is a megalomaniac.
Okay, that's a big, long word. Help me to spell it. Megalomaniac. Okay, M-E-G.
A-L-O-M-A-N-I-A-C.
Okay, megalomaniac. Okay.
A symptom of mental illness marked by delusions of greatness and wealth, an obsession with doing extravagant or grand things.
He is megalomaniacal. That's fun to say.
So, and we kind of like the section that we felt really kind of intimate in that was, I'm not sure what page this is for everybody else.
Yeah. Tell me what the paragraph starts with.
It starts with leaving his place in the immediate presence of the Father.
Okay, so this is a little early on. Let me just find this. This is the paragraph, right? Okay, I got it. I'm there. Okay, keep going.
It says, so if you kind of go down, intimating that though laws might be necessary for the inhabitants of the world, angels, being more exalted, needed no such restraint, for their own wisdom was a sufficient guide.
Got it.
They were not beings that could bring dishonor to God. All their thoughts were holy, or it was no more possible for them than for God himself to err. So he's not only putting himself above the angels, but he's like the highest of all creation.
Great point.
And
incapable almost, it seems, of committing an immoral act.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that line there, needed no such restraint. He reasoned and he persuaded the angels that they needed no restraint. Now, what's behind that? What's implicit in that claim? This is Lucifer speaking to the angels. We need no such restraint. What's implicit in that?
They are
Exactly right. Exactly right, Tamara. That they are being restrained. So what's the other side of that? If I'm being restrained, right, or incarcerated, or handcuffed, or prevented, what do I want? People that are restrained, what do they want? Freedom. That's the flip side. So what you notice that freedom and liberty come up several times in both chapters. Did you pick that up? The promise of freedom, the promise of liberty. And so this you're exactly onto it there, Loren. This idea that, we don't need restraint. Well, wait a minute. are you being restrained? Right? He advertised a freedom that actually was not a freedom at all. He imposed the mentality of restraint and then proposed to deliver them from a restraint that wasn't there. Yeah. Fascinating. Okay. So that is very megalomaniacal, isn't it? Yeah. Very good. That's fun to say. Okay. Megalomaniac. Excellent. These delusions of grandeur. By the way, one more thing, and I'll get you, Matthew. You said something there that's, I think, exactly correct. I don't remember exactly how you said it, Lorraine. You might remember, but it was that he was insane. He had a mental illness. Maybe it was in the definition that you read. Yeah. Let me just say this. Sin is a form of insanity. It is irrational. It is indefensible. It is inexplicable. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. But it would not be an overstatement to say that Satan has literally turned himself. Lucifer, in becoming Satan, has increasingly, cumulatively turned himself into a being that has lost his rational faculties. And there are instances of this in Scripture, and we will likely have time to speak about them. Yes, Matthew.
I believe he's self-centered and just ugly in the inside.
Oh, I like that word. Okay, so self-centered, that's a good one. Did you find anything, was there any particular thing there that jumped out at you?
Yeah, well, there's a passage that I highlighted. I don't have it on me because my iPad's charging, but it's the point where the angels could have went back, but he lied to them and said that they've gone too far.
Yeah, we just read that. That's exactly right.
That's so ugly. Like, it's like, how could you
He
do that?
fully lied to them. And it's interesting. Let me just see if I can find this. I underlined the point. Did anybody? Oh, here it is. This is page 35. It says, the paragraph beginning, now the perfect harmony. Now the perfect harmony of heaven was broken. This is Matthew's point. Lucifer's disposition to serve himself instead of his creator aroused a feeling of apprehension when observed by those who considered that the glory of God should be supreme. So notice that's key right there. Lucifer's disposition to serve himself. What's the single word for that? Selfishness. Okay? We're going to see tomorrow that a fascinating transition takes place. When Adam and Eve sin, Ellen White encapsulates the transition that took place in the nature of Adam and Eve in a single sentence. She says, selfishness, do you know this? Took the place of love. Single sentence. That's what happened in the fall. Selfishness took the place of love. Okay, so that's exactly correct there. Self-centered, and I love this idea. That's ugly. There was an ugliness there, turning away from the natural perfect beauty that he'd been invested with. Okay, very good. Other character traits. Destiny.
Well, like when you think about a Democrat or a Republican, how they can either be moderate or extremist. When you're so extreme being a Democrat, you almost come around to the Republican side. And when you're such an extreme Republican, you almost come around to the Democrat side. It was kind of like Satan. He was so perfect, in my opinion, that he wasn't perfect because he was just like, in his mind, he was so perfect that he was like, well, like, I'm this so perfect being. And like where it says, though all his glory was from God, the mighty angel came to himself regarding it as pertaining to himself. So I took that as his thoughts. He thought his glory was from himself, not from God.
Okay, that's a good point. That's a very good point. A little bit of political philosophy there at the beginning. I enjoyed that. Okay, that's a great point. That there was such a power, such a responsibility, such a beauty that he began to. Don't we all do this, by the way? Yeah. To some degree, don't we? In our best moments, whether we just made a great basket or we're maybe looking real good, this outfit looks real good on us, or we just did a really kind or gracious thing, in our best moments, we are tempted to think, man, I did really well there. And not that there's anything wrong with feeling like you did well, but it's a very fine line between, hey, I did really well there, and I'm a really good person. Right? Rather than I did really good because God has been gracious to me and he has saved me and he has filled me with his grace and his spirit, and I'm just so thankful that I could make a contribution. That's the truth, but then there's that, man, I'm kicking goals. I'm doing it. Look at me. Right? And that's, I think, what you're hitting at there, Destiny, is that he began to think that all of this grandeur, all of this beauty, all of this responsibility was somehow inherent or innate within him, and he lost that gratitude, didn't he? He lost that thankfulness. Destiny.
since he thought he was all that or whatever, how it says like on the first page, Christ, the Word, the only begotten of God, was one with the eternal Father, one in the nature and the character and the purpose, the only being that could enter into all the counsels and purposes of God.
Yes.
And so we're just thinking like Satan he was so powerful and wonderful, and he could almost do everything that Jesus could do except create. Mm-hmm. So he was like a social climber, and he was like, wow, I'm a really cool being, so why can't I be in this social group up here? Like, and the table where you can't sit with us and Mean Girls. Like, Satan just wanted to hang out with the cool kids in heaven, and
he was at the cool kids table.
He couldn't sit at the cool kids table.
Okay, now let me just say a word about that. That actually goes back to something I've already mentioned, and we're going to have to pick this up tomorrow because it's so essential, and that is that there must have been some point of apparent significant commonality between Lucifer and Jesus for him to have thought that this was a reasonable aspiration. You get my point here? And I don't want to give the punchline to this yet because we're going to pick that up tomorrow. But he must have seen in Jesus something that was very similar to himself. And he thought, hey, how come he gets into the councils? How come he gets... why don't I? Right? Where if Jesus was radically different and, glorious in a way that was unlike the angel's glory, he would have never been tempted. He may not have been tempted to enter into that particular realm of thinking he could equal Jesus. Notice that it wasn't that he wanted to be equal with the Father. That became that later, that he thought he could do government better than the Father could. But it starts off with this, hey, how come Jesus is getting treated that way and I'm not getting treated that way? So there must have been a commonality there. And there was. And I'm just purposely avoiding the punchline because we'll pick that up tomorrow. Okay, Jenny.
I call him perverted.
Okay, he's perverted.
Page 35, it says that there was one who perverted the freedom that God had granted his creatures. And for me, like, if you're going to pervert something, you have to be perverted.
Okay, if you're going to pervert something, you have to be perverted. Very good. He was perverted. We tend to think of perverted in sexual terms. Nowadays, the language has sort of changed that way. Language is fluid, of course. But it's a point well taken that to pervert something is to move away from a well-defined path. Right? A well-defined, in this case, moral path, right? That's the straight way. And then to deviate from that is a perversion. It's a deviation, right? It's moving in a way that is not the prescribed way. And so he certainly, and notice specifically there, say it again, Jenny, what was the thing that he perverted?
The freedom that God had granted to his creatures.
Okay, now this is an important point. You cannot pervert something if there's not a standard. Mm-hmm. Right? You follow that? You can't have something that's evil just in and of itself, because evil is the absence or the perversion of goodness. Evil is like a parasite, right? Evil only exists if there's a standard that measures goodness. Perversion only exists if there's something to pervert, if there's some straight, beautiful, moral, godly, loving, narrow way to deviate from. And in this particular case, she says, he perverted his what? What's the good and beautiful thing that God had given? Freedom, and he perverted it. Okay, and that'll come huge over here when we talk about the nature of the rebellion. Freedom, that word is going to come up again and again. Okay, Rochelle.
I also think he was deluded. To go back to the question you were asking, why would he continue even if he knew what the outcome was going to be?
So he's deluded.
Yeah, he had, I guess, part of him thought that he, perhaps I possibly could somehow, accomplish this. And you see that in Revelation, like he tries to get everyone like, let's, make one last attempt kind of
Brilliant.
Thing. So yeah, even when the angels were saying to him and the angels, like, you cannot overcome the Creator. So why are you doing this?
It's a great point. So he's deluded. Let's go back. Let me show you this here. Page 39. To me, page 39, the paragraph that begins "in great mercy," that paragraph encapsulates. To me, that's the single most important paragraph in the whole chapter. Right? And it's a fairly lengthy one, so I won't read the whole thing here, but let me just bring out one point that's exactly the point that Rochelle is making here. And it says, Lucifer was convinced he was in the wrong. Okay, now, again, if you're convinced that this is the wrong thing to do, rationally, it's indefensible, and you do it anyway, is that not a form of insanity? Right? So this is going back to to this notion that Lucifer began to compromise his rational faculties, right? And this has happened now cumulatively over the course of thousands of years, and he has become, I think, insane. We would regard him as basically insane. And you give a great example there. Not that he's not intelligent. Not that he's not intelligent. Hugely intelligent. But intelligence and wisdom, two different things, right? Somebody over here said, wise and beautiful. Wise and beautiful. That wisdom is being lost. The intelligence is still there, but it's a certain kind of intelligence. It's a perverted intelligence, and it's an intelligence that has lost its mind, right? To be persuaded that you're in the wrong and to persist anyway is a sign of mental illness. And so, deluded. You know, you give a good example there, Rochelle, when you say that at the end, Satan tries, he's lost and he's lost and he's lost. He just spent 1,000 years on the uninhabited earth, and when the New Jerusalem comes down, he probably honestly believes at this point that he can take the city by force. I mean, what an absurdity. God is omnipotent. God is God. God could snap his fingers. One of my favorite statements from the pen of Ellen White, she says that God could destroy Satan and his host as easily as a child casts a pebble to the ground. So what's going on here is not a matter of strength, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow. That an idea is much harder to kill than a person. You kill a person, no problem, but how do you kill an idea? How do you kill an idea? Okay? And so, here we go. Deluded, great. That's exactly the kind of insight that I'm looking for. Okay, somebody else, sorry.
He was cunning.
Oh, yeah, excellent. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, we had to bring that one up. He was cunning. Tell me why you said that.
As Lucifer, he was wise, but then he started to use the wisdom as a weapon.
Okay, very good. What's another word another word that we often use? She uses it a couple times in the chapter. That subtle. Very good. Subtle. Very good. Okay, excellent. And notice root word here, sub, to come underneath, right? To be tricky, to not be right up front. There was always, another word she uses at least once, maybe twice there, is mysterious. There was a mysterious secrecy associated with the way that he promulgated his rebellion. He couldn't just come right out and say, megalomaniacally, if that's the right word, this is what I want, and this is what I'm after, and these are my ambitions. No. She says that at one point, he actually hid his rebellion and his insinuations under a guise of reverence for God. Right? So there's this tremendous subtlety, and we're going to see this when we come into Genesis 3. Because Genesis 3 is and you've already looked at that in the temptation in the fall chapter, but when we come into the text of Genesis 3 tomorrow, we're going to see that Lucifer, in this case Satan's insinuations, are couched in hey, this is in your own best interest. I'm just looking out for you, he basically says to Eve. Hey, I'm on your side, right? And that's exactly what's taking place here. He places himself ostensibly on the side of the angels, right? And so there's a subtlety there. There's a cunning there. The first thing that we're told about Lucifer in the text of Scripture, Satan rather, is not that he's strong, not that he's mighty, not that he's powerful, but that he's what? The serpent was more cunning. He was more subtle. Okay? And there's where the strength lies, in the subtlety, in the innuendo, in the intelligence, corrupted, not the wisdom, but the intelligence, the perverted intelligence. Okay, I saw some hands. Sorry, did you have your hand? Oh, I just got you, didn't I? Weldon.
Aris.
I always want... Say again?
Aris. The Neymar.
Oh, yeah. Okay, got it. Yeah.
Okay, Satan is the adversary of God and the destroyer of the holy beings.
Okay, so he's an adversary. So he's an enemy. So we'll put that up here. And destroyer. Now, why do you say destroyer?
It says here, Satan, the adversary of God and holy beings, and the destroyer of those whom heaven have committed to his guidance and guardianship.
Okay, excellent. So an enemy and a destroyer. Okay, very good. Destroyer. Okay, excellent. That certainly is a perversion of the resources that had been given to him. Mina.
He was a coveter and was not content.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that out. He was not content. Okay? What's the word we use for that? Single word. He was discontent. This is as low as I can go, I think. Discontent. Okay, give me some synonyms for discontent. If somebody's discontent, what are they? Okay, they're unhappy. They're unsatisfied. What else?
Uncomfortable.
They're what?
They're insecure.
They're discontent. If I'm discontent,
Restless.
oh, I love that word, restless. Who was that, JJ? Restless, discontent, dissatisfied. And the root, let me ask you this question. What do you think the root of discontent is? What's the root of this kind of restlessness? What do you think it might be? What's the root of it? No, I'm saying, like, where does that spring from? What is the ground or the soil out of which discontent? Have you ever been discontent?
Seeking more
Okay, seeking for more, that's very good. Another word she uses is aspire, seeking for more. When is it that we're seeking for more? When is it that we want more and we're discontent? What's the root? I'm looking for... Okay, when what we have is not enough. What's another word for that? When we're
looking
greedy.
to another.
Okay, we're greedy. What do we call that? When what we have is not enough, we're not what?
Satisfied.
Yeah, okay, you guys are saying all the words. We're not thankful.
Oh.
Right? We're not thankful, isn't that right? So there's a sense of entitlement, isn't there? I deserve more. How come this is all I get? I want more. The Apostle Paul would say, many, many years later, he would say, I have learned whatever state I'm in, therewith to be content. I can be in the palaces of the wealthy and be happy, and I can be in the hovels of the poor and I can be happy. I'm thankful for what I have, not always aspiring to what I don't have. Let me just show you this fascinatingly. Come with me to Romans chapter 1. Look at this. So, in Romans chapter 1, and of course we'll have a whole class on Romans. Pastor Nathan Renner will be here. I want you to see this. In Romans chapter 1, there is this long list. It's sort of a treatment. It's probably Paul's most thorough treatment of the wrath of God and what the wrath of God is. Not so much, according to Paul, the active imposition of God's active wrath, but it's giving them up. He gave them up in verse 24, and also in verse 26. He gave them up to vile passions. Verse 28, God gave them up to a debased mind. Now let's see if we can find this here. Looking for the text here that says, neither were thankful. See if you can find that.
21.
Is it 21? Yep, there it is. Okay, so take a look at this. It says, it's going through this list. We'll pick it up in verse 20. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, speaking of God, are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Verse 21. Now watch this. Speaking of the wicked that have turned away from God and from a knowledge of the true God. Watch this. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God. This sounds Luciferian, really. Right? They knew God. They did not glorify him as God. And notice this. Nor were what? Thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. That passage could easily describe the descent of Lucifer himself. And notice, what's the kernel, what's the core, what's the nucleus right at the heart of that passage? Why is all of this perversity going on in the text? They were unthankful. Neither were thankful. You cannot overstate the importance of just being thankful for what you have and not always clamoring or longing or hoping or aspiring for what you don't have. Yeah?
What is that scripture that says, let your conversations be without covetousness?
It's in Colossians or Ephesians.
Yeah,
That's right.
It says, be content with such things as you have.
Such things as you have.
Like, that's literally what Satan was not.
That's exactly right. Discontent. Wanted more. What he had was not enough. There's a lack of thankfulness there. As we sometimes say, there was not an attitude of gratitude. Right? There was a longing for more, a fundamental discontent. Okay, great point. I'm so glad you brought that out, Mina. Okay, anything else here that we've not got? We've got enemy, destroyer, prideful, megalomaniac, self-centered and ugly, perverted, deluded, cunning and subtle, discontent. Anything we've missed here? Jenny?
Resistant to love.
Okay, he's resistant to love. Oh, that's interesting. That's quite an emotional observation, isn't it? Resistant to love, because God did make overtures toward him. He resisted those overtures. Okay, very good. I'm not going to write that one up because I'm running out of room, but resistant to love, that belongs there. Okay, please, Loren.
One of the things that I noticed that I didn't notice before is he kind of wavered back and forth in his loyalty and his thoughts. Like he doesn't realize what his thoughts were. So I kind of feel like the insecure really describes him. Like subject to fears, doubts, not self-confident or sure, the insecure person, not firmly or reliably placed or fastened. Like he just, his mind wasn't firm. Like he was just kind of all over the place.
That's a good point. It reminds me, the text there is that in James it says a double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. So there is an instability, isn't there? And I think that you brought that out, Destiny, this idea that he cared too much about what others thought. There was a fundamental insecurity. That's a great point. I'd never thought of Lucifer as insecure, Lucifer as he's transitioning into Satan, but I think it's a point well taken, because insecurity kind of goes back to the lack of thankfulness, the discontent. When you're not happy with who you are and what you are and where you are, then you are in a state of insecurity. You want to be what you're not. You want to be where you're not. You want to be who you're not. Right? Isn't that right? We're not secure. We're not fastened in who we are.
It also says not confident or uncertain. Like I just feel
which you see this transition.
Yeah, he's kind of wavering.
He's rebelling, and then remember they had the big worship. God called them all together. He explained clearly the nature of the relationship of Jesus and him, and then they worshiped, and his heart was carried away with the worship, and he was again persuaded. But then pride came in. So you're right. There's an instability there. I'm going to write that down. I think that's great. There's deluded and insecure. I'll just put that over here.
And I think another example with that is when you're insecure, you want to tear others down.
Ooh, come on.
There we go.
Come on.
And so let's talk about it. He comes for Adam and Eve, and it says that
man.
So he's plotting to ruin the human race. In the happiness and peace of the holy pair in Eden, he beheld a vision of the bliss that to him was forever lost. And it goes on, but he wants to tear them down solely because it's how he feels.
That's exactly right. That is a great, great point. This is sort of getting close to a phenomenon that psychologists call projection, that we project onto others what the absence that we feel in ourselves or the insecurity that we feel in ourselves, and he is determined that he is going to basically wreak havoc on God's good creation. Why would he care? Why would he want to ruin the experience of Adam and Eve? Or perhaps at this point he is beginning to be so deluded that he thinks to some degree that he'll actually be benefiting them. He certainly pitches that. That's the pitch. You will be as gods, knowing good and evil. I love this idea that there's a fundamental insecurity and an instability there. He is not settled or fastened in who he is. He's got to be something else. Okay, I saw another hand that I thought sort of shot up there, but maybe I missed it. Mina.
I was just going to say, like, your comment brought me to understand Matthew chapter 5, verse 37, that says, "But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil." And I haven't understood that, but like it makes sense, because when you fluctuate with your will, you lose the whole ground and stability of which you start to make judgments.
Yeah, that's a good point. Conviction. Yeah. A settled conviction.
And I think that's what Lucifer fared into, like seeing that he was going to be defeated and destroyed, decided to just kind of take up the ball on himself and say, let's just run with it and destroy however many people.
Let's transition to identifying elements of Satan's rebellion. What was the big picture? Remember, I sort of gave you that idea that what if you were a newspaper reporter or you're a journalist and you're interviewing him? What are you after? So I'm just going to put here elements. Elements of rebellion. So let's transition a bit here and spend our last sort of 15 minutes. We'll pick this conversation up. We're going to be having this conversation all week, really. But we've begun this important sort of dialogue and trying to understand the nature of the rebellion and especially the nature of God's solution to the rebellion. Okay, please, Matthew.
Question though, like the true ones or the ones that he showed the people?
We can put them into two categories. We can say what he was really after or what he said he was after.
He wanted worship.
Okay, so what is that?
He wanted worship.
Okay, so he was after worship. Okay, so we'll put that over on this side. Okay, so what he really was after was worship. Okay, great point. That's going to come up again and again, especially when we get to passages like Matthew chapter 4 in the wilderness, where, he says, cause these stones to be made bread. Nah. Throw yourself down from the temple. Nah. But then finally, what does he say? Bow down and worship me. Matthew chapter 4, verse 9. Right? So at the end of the day, when Satan puts his cards on the table, when he reveals what he's really after, what does he say to Jesus, the Son of God? Worship me. Great point. Okay? Somebody else. What are we after here? What were the elements of the rebellion? Please, Destiny.
I think he just wanted to fit in with the Trinity. And if he fit in with the Trinity, I think that's how you say it.
Okay.
Then he would get all of these things like that he wanted. Like the worship, the people revering him, then he would feel special, he wouldn't feel insecure, and it all goes along with it.
Okay, good there. I'm going to put, what you're describing here is an aspiration. Aspiration, and that word comes up several times in especially the first chapter there. He aspired. And we see this, we'll pick this up tomorrow in Isaiah 14. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne. I will sit on the mount of the congregation. This desire, this discontent, I'm going to go up. These are the sort of elements of the rebellion. Okay, Jim.
He was insinuating the fact that the angels didn't need laws. And this is kind of confusing to me because God's law is, it was always there, but it's the law of love. And that I get kind of confused by the fact that she uses laws here.
It's a great point. Jim is saying that he's confused by the fact that the word law comes up so regularly. It is interesting, and I'll find this quotation, I'll bring it tomorrow, and you might be familiar with it yourself, that she says that when Lucifer first approached the angels about the restrictive nature of God's law, she says that they were surprised to hear there was a law. Oh, there's a law? Right? So they were so in harmony with the law and with the principles of love, because you boil the law down, keep boiling it down, boil it down, boil it down, boil it down. It comes down to a single principle. Paul says in Romans chapter 13, all the law is fulfilled in this one word, and the word is love. Right? So when he originally approaches and says, hey, this law, it's restrictive, it doesn't allow us the freedom to do what we want to do, they're like, there's a law? A law? It's a great point. Jim.
But the question that I'm really having is, since the Decalogue was presented because of sin to show us a reflection of ourselves, then it boils down to the two, love for God, love for man, which boils down to one, which is the love of God.
Excellent.
And there was no sin in heaven up to this point.
You're saying, what was the law?
Their only law was the law of God. And so that's why I'm confused by the plural nature of the word sin.
Well, you are exactly correct here, and we're probably going to have to pick that up not this week, but next week when we actually get into the nature of the law. We'll have a whole class on the law. But you are correct, because when we get, for example, into Leviticus and Exodus, there are all of these very specific laws. I think 612 or 613 the Orthodox Jews say in Torah. 612 of these things. And of course, the vast majority of those wouldn't have existed in heaven, because they pertain to this specific situation in this particular culture. But you boil the 613 down and you get the 10. You boil the 10 down, you get the 2. You boil the 2 down, you get the 1. Right? Now that doesn't mean that there were not some strictures or some rules or some guardrails even in heaven, but the angels were surprised to hear that there were. Right? In the same way, let me use this illustration. There are what are called paternal providership laws, or used to be called. And those are basically laws that say, as a father, you have to provide A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P for your children in order to not be a delinquent father. Okay, but here's the interesting thing. I don't know any of those laws. I am not familiar, as a father of 2 boys, I don't know the fine details of any of those laws because, frankly, I don't care. I'm going to provide for my children because I love them and hopefully, and here's a key point, go above and beyond the minimum threshold requirement of the law. You see? So if the standard of the law, some people think, the Ten Commandments. Yes, the Ten Commandments are just the beginning. The Ten Commandments are not the end of, because Jesus actually shows up, doesn't he? He shows up and he says, man, you guys thought that if you just didn't get in bed with a woman that you were sweet. But I'm telling you, if you look at a woman to lust after her, you've already committed adultery. Right? You thought that if you killed somebody, oh man, I shouldn't have killed that guy. Now you're in violation of the law. He says, if you're angry with your brother, you're in violation. Right? So the Ten Commandments are not the be-all, end-all of what it means to be in a real, intimate, connected love relationship with God. That's the starting point. That's the starting point. So when the angels were made aware that there was some allegedly restrictive law, they were so far in advance of that in the nature of their relationship to God, service and selflessness and magnanimity and generosity and kindness, that to find out that there was a law, the minimum threshold, which would have been way down here, which, by the way, makes sense. Because if they back off from that threshold, wherever they were, this is slightly philosophical, if they back off from that threshold a little bit, and then they back off a little bit more, right? But they've not yet transgressed the law. This is why the angels hadn't gone too far. See, maybe you've wondered about that, because she says that when Lucifer began to say, hey, you've gone too far, and she says this was true of Lucifer, but it wasn't true of the angels. Okay, what had happened? Why had the angels, hadn't they begun in the rebellion? The answer is no. They had simply, in some sense, been backing away from the high standard that they had set, which was above what you might call the threshold of legality. So they're coming, and there was still opportunity for them to say, whoa, and turn the ship around and right the course. Satan, Lucifer, he had gone too far. He had gone not just backing away from this high standard of selflessness and godliness and generosity and love and munificence. He had gone below the minimum threshold, the legality of the requirement, and therefore he had gone too far. His sin was also exaggerated by the fact that he was in the very presence of God. So he was wiser, or should have been, right? Jesus said in John chapter 3, verse 19, he was speaking to Nicodemus, and he said, this is the condemnation, that light has come in the world, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. This is a key point. What Jesus is saying there is that condemnation is directly proportionate to light. The amount of light that we have access to is the flip side of the condemnation that we would have if we turned away from that light. So Lucifer, of course, even if he only went down to the same level, so to speak, as the other angels, of course, he had gone further. He was the instigator. He was the deceiver. But because he had more light, he had more exposure, he had more access, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow, how he leveraged that access, he was held to a higher standard. Right? This is very simple stuff. In the same way that I hold my 14-year-old son to a different standard, the same principle, but a different level of that principle than I do my 12-year-old son. Right? He's had longer to live. I've had more conversations with him. His brain is more fully developed. He's had more experience. So I hold him here. Right? And if I had an even greater disparity in the age of my children, say I had an 18-year-old son and an 8-year-old son, I'm going to hold them to very different levels. Right? And this one could do something that if this one did, this would be a giant, infraction, where this might just be hey, we don't do it that way here. You see the difference? Okay, so worship, aspiration, let's get back on track here. What are the elements of the nature of the rebellion? We're going to go about 10 more minutes.
Disguise and lies.
Okay, disguise and lies. I have to tell you, there's a little anxiety that I have whenever I go to write on the board, because I know it's being videotaped and I've got all these people looking, and I'm like, I hope I spell this right. Oh man. Okay, so there was disguise and lies. Why did Lucifer disguise his intent, his motive? Why would he have had to do that? Any thoughts? Sorry.
To hide his intent.
Okay. Very good. To hide his intentions. Excellent. Why? Why would he need to hide them?
Because they weren't stupid.
Okay, because the angels weren't stupid? That's a good point. They were because they were ugly. Right? You just can't come right out and say and sort of advertise massive selfishness and an ambition, ungodly ambition. This is sort of like, you're familiar with the term bait and switch? Bait and switch, where you sort of advertise one thing and then they get you into the store, or they get you to make the phone call, or they get you to click on the link, and then what they're actually trying to sell you is very different than what they lured you in with. Satan is the bait and switch artist here. He's lured in with promises of freedom. He's lured in with a sense of reverence for God, right? But he knows that really it's about him. It's about him. It's about me. It's about what I want. Okay. Anybody want to add anything to the other side? What did he pretend or what was he ostensibly wanting? What did he let on?
How
Yes.
about territories? Like he wanted to have his angel on his side, even on earth, he wanted to have his own place.
Okay, so like there's almost a territorialism.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting idea, like a geographic territorialism. I think that you could make a case for that. Is there anything specifically in the chapter that alluded to that?
Well, not here, but we did. No.
Okay.
Just my.
I just wondered if maybe you'd seen something that I hadn't seen. I'd love that.
Well, he's seeking to promote good of the universe, so he needs to have something. He says Satan had made it appear that he himself was seeking to promote good of the universe.
That's
so
right.
He wants to be the leader in a place.
Brilliant. Okay, that's good. And you do get a little bit of that sort of territorialism there in Isaiah 14. I will sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. Okay, great point. Great point. I like that. Jason.
I'm not quite sure how
I'm loving those specs, by the way. Those are great.
Not quite sure how we would frame this, but Satan is using his position as a prominent angel to kind of convince or to add weight to the arguments that he's giving to the angels that he's supposed to reveal the character of God to.
Okay, this is a great point.
A normal angel would never question based on the ranking, right? Like
he leveraged his position.
Exactly. He's using his position to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. I've had that same thought myself. He leveraged his position. Yeah, that's exactly right. He could say things like, in the same way that if I make a claim about Barack Obama right now, if I make some claim about scandal or some claim about immorality or whatever, who am I? Right? I'm one of 330 million citizens in the United States. But if one of his senior advisors, if the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense makes a similar kind of accusation, right? And even if there are people that say, well, I'm not so sure that's true, who would I be, me, little old me, to question the accuracy of this, because I don't have that kind of access. So Lucifer could go back to the angels who didn't have the level of access that he had, dwelling in the immediate presence of God as the covering cherub. He could go back and say, hey guys, I'm a little nervous about some of what I'm seeing behind closed doors. And oh really? Tell us more. So he leveraged his position. He leveraged his access.
And what we were talking about in our group, which was super interesting, is that up until that point, the angels as a whole had never really been introduced to a lie before.
Oh, great point.
So why would they would have zero reason?
No reference, no frame of reference. Man, that's a great point. Do you get that? This idea that a lie is a whole new, like we talked about yesterday with Jesus, how where he went dying the second death, that was to boldly go where no person, no being, no God, no one had ever gone before. This was new territory. This was an atom bomb. This was an explosion of a new kind, a new reality, a new realm. I never thought of that before. Lucifer, Satan, has introduced almost like a new substance, a radioactive, unaccountable. Ellen White actually uses that word, unaccountable. She says that his words were strange and unaccountable. In other words, it was hard to sort of pin them down, right? A new thing was introduced. Man, okay, how could we, what could we, any ideas on how we could sort of communicate that?
Strange conflict, passing on the struggle, because I know Ellen White is using the word struggle a lot to describe it.
Yeah, I like that. I'm just going to put introduces something strange, something new and strange. Take a look, and I'll try to remember to do it tomorrow. Find that quote where she talks about, let me see if I can just briefly find it here, where she talks about, oh, here it is. I just picked it up. It's right here. Oh, you have strange conflict?
Oh, no, that's a different one.
Okay, listen to this. In great mercy, according to his divine character, God bore long with Lucifer. This gives us an insight to the fact that this didn't happen in a day or a week. It could have happened over years for all we know, right? Not likely, but God bore long with Lucifer from the beginnings of the rebellion, I'm saying, right up until the point that he crossed the line, so to speak. Listen, the spirit of discontent and disaffection had never before been known in heaven. This is exactly your point. It was a new element, strange, mysterious, unaccountable. What does an accountant do? Keeps track of stuff. So what if something is unaccountable? You can't keep track of it. You can't put your finger on it. This was some new, strange, unaccountable thing. Let me just continue reading here. Lucifer himself had not at first been acquainted with the real nature of his feelings. This was new for the universe. This was new, full stop. Even Lucifer, it was new. For a time, he had feared to express the workings and imaginings of his mind, yet he did not dismiss them. He did not see whither he was drifting. He didn't get it. He himself did not see where he was drifting, where he was going. But such efforts as only infinite love and wisdom could devise were made to convince him of his error. And then we've already read this. His disaffection was proved to be without cause. He was made to see what would be the result of persisting in revolt. Lucifer was convinced that he was in the wrong. So this new, strange, almost, I don't know. It's an invention. He invented iniquity. Okay, Izzy.
Just to back up what Walden was saying, to how he wanted to take over not just the heavenly realm, but also other worlds. It says, I'm not sure, my pages are different.
Yeah, that's okay, read it.
But it says, Lucifer had concluded that if he could carry the angels of heaven with him in rebellion, he could carry also the worlds. He had artfully presented his side of the question, employing sophistry and fraud to secure his objects.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. Who was that? Who was it that brought up the territorialism point? That was you, Walden, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay, you can thank Izzy. That's great. I'm going to write that up then. He was, is this too low? Can I go down here? Johnny? That's sweet. Okay. So I'm going to go here, territorial. Help me out. T-E-R-R? Two R's? Okay. Okay, thank you. Territorial, I just was confused about the two R's. Okay, so there was a territorialism there. There was this idea that he could sort of take over a little bit of this, and Satan must have thought, man, he must have felt really good when he was sent to earth. Now, he wasn't sent only to earth. He was sent to the worlds. We'll talk probably about that tomorrow. But it must have been feeling like, hey, I'm going to get a chance to try out this, Ellen White actually calls this experiment. This evil experiment. We're living in the test tube of this experiment. Okay, we're going to have to end our class today, but we're going to continue on with this. We're going to finish up with the elements of rebellion tomorrow, and then we'll also talk about, and this is what we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about, not just tomorrow, but the rest of our time, full stop, is why did God choose to deal with the rebellion in the way that he did? So be prepared to talk about that. Our first class tomorrow will be largely discussion, and then we'll launch off into the text of Scripture, and we'll do the do. Sound good? All right.